In this presentation, I will be outlining some differences and similarities between the following: epic theatre, naturalistic theatre, and theatre of the absurd. Also 3 plays: Mother Courage by Bertolt Brecht, The Caretaker by Harold Pinter, and Fences by August Wilson. An effective way to portray a style of theatre is through the characters. The importance of the characters varies in creating the theme or plot of the play, which also determines the distance between the audience and the show itself. In absurd theatre, most techniques used proceed to be against the nature of against. Pinter, the practitioner of absurd theatre, embedded a technique called anti-character, in which characters would not necessarily be real people you connect to, rather they would just be names, often job roles, as a basic idea of who they are. This also allows actors who are playing the characters to multi-role. The characters are often played by both men and women and be allowed to be interpreted by each performer and each show spectre. This compares to epic theatre, which however allows both anti-characterization and full characterization to emerge. The characters are over the top and unrealistic, but still seem to resemble real people. They have real names but not full character descriptions, small ones at the most to give a basic idea of who they are playing. Absurd theatre would avoid this altogether. Naturalistic theatre is the most far from the other 2 styles of theatre previously. In this you would see a heavy need for in-depth character description and realistic casting and full names. This brings a sense of reality to characters. You'll care about the characters and their feelings more, and it points to the plot will more easily pull emotions from the audience, like sympathy and emotional recall. The barrier between the actors and audience is broken with the instigation, the presence of the fourth wall. Stanislavski was a crusader for realism in acting. He believed that the character had to be fully understood by the actor to be portrayed realistically and believably. He said that actors had an idea of whether the character on the emotional level is the same as themselves. This way the actor could take the identity of the character and create a natural speech and movement. Naturalistic was also about making what was going on the stage as close to real life as possible, which is the stand of most famous, which brings us to, in which from this Stan's most famous quote appeared: "There is no such thing as small roles, only small actors." In epic theatre, we see the use of costumes are often disjointed and symbolic to the characters, again building on this disconnection from the role. So if someone was playing a soldier, they would be very little, very symbolic piece of costume, such as a hat, maybe a jacket, or a gun. These things not always being time accurate, but rather a representation. Absurd theatre with similar techniques is used, but in some cases costumes are not all used at all, rather placards or the actor states their roles pre-show. The costumes might be all one colour and matching. This compares to naturalistic theatre, in which the costumes are often true to the time set in the play and reflective of each character and aligned with the time period in which the play is set. So if the play was set in the 1600s, accurate clothing would be worn right down to the undergarments to the extent of at least the budget of the play. Historical events strongly influence epic theatre, so the audience could see the present and the past. Brecht often used historical events to make a point about the social and political situation of the present. An advantage of using the past like this is in that the audience can watch in an objective and emotional way. This was, of course, the main aim of epic theatre. Brecht used a technique called the magic strand effect, alienation, to keep his audience detached emotionally from the characters in play itself. Brecht himself was influenced by Marxist beliefs and Asian theatre styles. The political messages of his plays were strongly enforcing the need of action in society by the audience. The influence on naturalistic falls on the development of modern science, and science has become based on rational thought, and that was absurd in the sense This is reflected in realistic theatre as the base around this experience of sense, as well as science and human thought and physiology throughout the 19th century had a strong impact on development of realistic theatre and absurdism in the theatrical aesthetic that rose aftermath of World War II. Philosophy of absurdism centers around the concept that life is meaningless and the search for meaning is also inherently meaningless. For the theoretical aesthetic, this leads to numerous comedy plays, which heighten simplistic plot lines to extraordinary proportions. One of the most famous examples are Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, a full-length play where two best friends try to pass time waiting for a person named Godot, who never comes. Beckett labels this play as a tragic comedy and refers to the humour we take as depressing boredom the main characters must fend off. Although absurdism and epic theatre have little in common, the Russian playwright Arthur Adomny borrowed tools for both aesthetic in his fusion of the genres in which his own work came from. If you look at the posters here on this presentation, you will see the styles of set that are used in the current plays: Mother Courage, Fences, and The Caretaker. In the first one, we see Mother Courage and her children. In this set, we see a simple wagon and simple sets. Mother Courage's wagon is a good use of symbolic representation of the character, as this is made as a main part in what she is like. The dirty floor will also resemble the floors of the war. This gives a good idea. Also, it reflects with the lighting, which also adds an effect of in-depth and makes you focus directly on the brightest part of the floors, which the actors would stand on. The usable stage and props resemble the different scenes. It is very minimalistic, however, it gives a good idea on which a scene is set. If you look at the next one, we are looking at Fences. You can see that it's got realistic trees and real floors with different levels. The lighting is made to look outside and in the sun, and a full real house is in display. This is to give the most realistic representation as possible. This is so we can look at it in the sense of like looking at a movie and see the actual stage, and it all will be functional too, which adds to the actor's performance. In this one we see The Caretaker. It's like a storybook per se, but inside it's quite realistic. It's something you'd often see drawn in a story or as a painting. The bright lighting highlights the stage and every object on it. The dimension of the wall will give the idea that it is a play, however it's still a real story. The mess to resemble the room brings out the characters' descriptions. This adds to the plot of the play and things said in the play about the untidiness of the room. In each play we see the theme of family in the plot. In Mother Courage we know the children and their mother, and whatever Mother Courage goes through in the play, her children will go through as well. Even though the whole premise of what she does is by selling the things from her wagon in the best interest of her children, until during the play, the children either slowly die or take away the different circumstances, but the idea of mother nurturing is throughout. This compares to how the family in The Caretaker. In this, Davies and Mick, the brothers in a flat, have both similar and different opinions when it comes to the one of them that helped the homeless man. But we do see the idea of brotherly love that we learn when Davis is given Mick a place to stay while his house is being renovated. There's respect for the other brother's choices, while there is misunderstanding between each other that there is brought to light by the homeless man. In Fences, however, family plays the biggest part, and we see Troy betray his family in his affair. We see Troy's wife be mothering to Gabe, who is not her son, but treats it like. And we also see the idea that Troy is a bit of a rude person to other people, to how his upbringing was, and how society was treated him through the years as a black man born in Pittsburgh, United States. Gabe receiving the motherly love is a direct similarity to Mother Courage and their children, and the brotherly love between Gabe and Troy is also a similarity for The Caretaker with Mick and Davies. Mother Courage was set in the 13-year war, so it's obvious without knowing that the play will see some political debating going on. There is a show of extended words between Mother Courage and the clerk in the bar while she is stock-taking with her daughter, about the duration of war and men being the pinpoint of it all. She talks about the finest of plans being messed up by the pettiest of those searching for achievements, like a monument on conquering the world. The clerk could make her a war last forever if she wished, with the soldiers who drink in the rain, real men rather than emperors and generals who fear to get their uniform wet. This compares to fantasies in which post-World War main topics of racism and neglection of the working class for the government. We see Troy and his family, despite the ideal society, still have problems of a white family, like betrayal of marriage and having an affair. The narrator portrays racism in the social system, in the workplace, in sport, and which untightly affects Troy's aspiration. Troy Maxson is constantly facing racism that is engraved on the rules of the racial hierarchy. Fair and unfair spoken, therefore, he decides to protect Corey from experiencing the blockade in this drive for excess. In the end, although Troy is always striving to obtain agency, Troy succumbs of the rules of racism because the racism ideals too hard to overcome. In The Caretaker, the issues of race and national origin seem to have more prevalent than the social class in the text, but that is only because they are discussed so openly. Social class, on the other hand, is a much more subtle theme, and one of the audiences that reader must consider in order to understand the revolutionary impact of Printer's play. The lower classes were often folded of high drama, and the motivations of the characters, all three of them, are oppressed by dint of their class, which means that they are privy to the external authorities and controls that strip them from anonymity of their own. They are trying to eke out of living, and in Davy's case, they are a complete unterrity and mechanism society that would allow him to fend for himself. He has no jobs, no papers, and lacks his personality first into one characterized of mandatory, prejudiced, and misplaced self-regard. Ashton's lower-class status made him a victim of medical authorities, and Mick cannot get his head round his plans to better his life. Overall, the characters simply amplify the beliefs and values and behaviours that are demeaned by the society and what is worth regarding the little people in the society.